Farim fíor chuoin fáilte rúh an seo nocht. Mar in Janachan is anam domsa a scoil na gailge an léon chéilse bheilid is éireann agus na tangáilíochta in UCD. The Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies is statutorily obliged to deliver a lecture in alternate years in UCD and TCD. On behalf of President Deeks and the School of Irish, Celtic Studies, Irish Folklore and Linguistics, I welcome the holding of this year's lecture in UCD. I warmly welcome the Chairman of the Board of the Institute, Professor Anders Alquist, its Director, with that particular cap, Professor Liam Breatnach, and all of you who are attending Tionol na Bliana Seo, and indeed those of you who may not have the opportunity to attend any of the weekend's events other than this lecture, and you will be especially welcome when you have switched off your phones. The School of Celtic Studies and the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies is a bulwark against cultural amnesia. Its work allows voices to be heard that a purely instrumental mindset might not consider important. The voices of fragile Celtic languages and texts, particularly from the relatively distant past, though these things are very relative. Voices whose exquisite expressions and sensibilities are extraordinary manifestations of the humanity of this island and the neighbouring lands. Well, maybe apart from Scotland, but we'll get back to you in a couple of hours about that. It therefore gives me great pleasure to welcome, above all, tonight's speaker, Professor Liam Breatnach, who is currently Senior Professor in the Institute, as well as I've already said, its Director. UCD is his alma mater. He earned his primary degree here in Celtic Studies. His PhD is from Trinity, where he has served as Professor of Early Irish, having also lectured at the University of Bonn. Professor Breatnach embodies and has enriched beyond measure the work of the Institute and of Celtic Studies in general. He has been central in allowing the voices I spoke of to be heard and understood. He has transformed our understanding of early Irish laws in a long series of high quality, indeed groundbreaking publications, of which I will only mention two here. His Significance of the Brethren Navid in Peritia 3, and his companion to the Corpus Juris Hibernicae. His expertise and scholarship are manifest across a range of areas, including, for instance, his account of Middle Irish in Star na Gaeilge. He is a worthy successor to Turnaisen and D.A. Binchy. He's also a busy man. He has been delivering seminars in the Institute and in Trinity for decades. He has been instrumental in reviving the Institute's summer school, and he was centrally involved in the organisation of the Celtic Congress in Maynooth some years ago. This drew an attendance of over 600, and it was of real significance, as are the other instances of that particular conference, in proclaiming forcefully that Celtic Studies is a global discipline and a force to be reckoned with. Holders of the purse strings here in Ireland would do well to take note of this acknowledgement of the rich and life-enhancing quality of Irish and of other Celtic languages. We are about to experience a measure of those qualities now, as I ask Professor Breatnach to speak to us on the subject of the Church in the laws of early medieval Ireland. Please welcome him.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those kind words. So as Thomas Charles Edwards, you have a handout there in the article, the work mentioned on the handout, section 1, noted some years ago, law was one of the greatest achievements of the Irish in the early Middle Ages. A very extensive corpus of legal writing has survived the vicissitudes of history, although a great deal has also been lost. The surviving texts can be distinguished in various ways. They are found in Latin and Irish. The earliest Irish texts date from the late 7th century, and from then on we have a continuous stream of legal writings in Old Irish, Middle Irish and Early Modern Irish. and an essential distinction is that between law books and legislation. Most of the surviving texts in the vernacular belong to the former category, that is law books, books talking about the law, that is, they're stating what the law is. On the other hand, the survival rate for texts setting out specific pieces of legislation is not so high, although we do have a few important specimens and numerous invaluable fragments. And the most important text in Latin is the Collectio Canonum Hebronensis, handout 1 there, the Irish collection of canons. It consists of 67 books, which are for the most part concerned with canon law, but secular matters are not entirely ignored. Of the many texts in the vernacular, probably the most important is Seanachas Mór, again on the handout, given its extent and the wide compass of legal topics which it covers. Over this broad span, then, of roughly 1,000 years, we can distinguish a number of different forms in which the vernacular texts are presented, the most important of which are set out in the handout number 2. The first is self-standing original texts, most of which belong to the Old Irish period, but this is not exceptionalist. It's exceptionless. And number 2 is annotations or glosses and commentaries on these texts. These begin already in the Old Irish period and form the bulk of legal writings of the Middle and Early Modern Irish periods. In their earliest manifestation, they are produced as separate text, where all of the original text that is reproduced are short extracts, which are rarely longer than 2 or 3 words, and the sole purpose of which is to indicate the passage to which the annotations refer. However, by the 12th century at least, they appear together with a complete copy of the text they annotate. The main text is written in large script, and the annotations and commentaries are in smaller script, often between the lines and extending into the margins. And then item 3 there, in handout 2, a further development then was the production of text where greater importance was assigned to the commentaries, such that the main text was heavily abbreviated. And then 4, the last major category consists of recasting earlier texts, that is, compiling extracts from a wide variety of different texts, arranged according to the subject matter in more or less organised miscellanies. The most organised of these are 4 texts from the early modern Irish period, which can be called digests, since they consist of a number of subsections, each of which illustrates a particular legal principle and is preceded by a heading stating exactly what that principle is. Now, while we have firm evidence for all of these stages, and this is just a rough categorization of 4 stages, you could subdivide them a bit more. We have firm evidence for all of these stages and forms of presentation. The accidents of survival have affected them differently. No manuscript, so the first thing is no manuscript from the Old Irish period survives. The earliest manuscript containing law texts is the 12th century Oxford Bodleian manuscript Rawlinson B 502, but the majority of the manuscripts are even later. While a substantial number of texts from the Old Irish period survive in later manuscripts, copies of others have suffered physical damage, with pages missing at the beginning and or the middle and or the end. Yet others survive only in extracts, that is category 2. That is to say, all copies of the original text that they annotate have been lost. Only the annotation survives. For others, only copies of the abbreviated text survive, that's category 3. And then finally, a substantial portion of the written texts of the Old Irish period survive only in the form of extracts in the recastings discussed or mentioned under category 4, miscellaneous. Thus, in seeking to determine what the law was with regard to any particular issue in the Old Irish period, we very often have to engage in a complicated process of analysing and sifting heavily reprocessed sources. Nevertheless, a great deal can be achieved once the nature of the sources is acknowledged and they are used with due care. And the most important stimulus to the study of early Irish law in recent decades has, of course, been the publication in 1978 of the Corpus Juris Hibernicae, item 1 on the handout, edited by D.A. Binchy. This made available for the first time in print reliable texts of almost all of the surviving legal material and led to a renaissance in scholarship in this area. One thing that has become ever clearer in the intervening years is that the Church and its institutions had a central role in the law, whether in the drafting of texts, the study of and commentary on law texts, or the enactment of legislation. Early Irish law itself is represented as a conflation of traditional practices and the precepts of Christianity. And the law texts clearly reflect a society in which the new religion is firmly established and its institutions are rich and powerful. Now, in my talk tonight, I propose to concentrate on how the personnel of the church are represented in the law texts. And this lecture has grown out of work for a chapter in a collaborative volume on the early Irish church due to appear in the not too distant future. First of all, the status of clerics then. Early Irish law was markedly inegalitarian, and there was not even a fictional notion of equality before the law. A person's legal capacity, for example, the value of their oath, varied according to their status. Similarly, the compensation payable for an offence against a person varied with their status. Accordingly, status was a highly relevant factor in legal cases, and lawyers would have to know about it, and judges would have to know about it. It is to this fact that we owe the existence of the utterly invaluable class of law texts known as status texts, some of which are listed on the handout, item 3. A number of these have survived from the Old Irish period, and taken together they provide us with a remarkably detailed description of early medieval Irish society. The principal status texts are those Creath Gavlach, LÉACHT, Oricach Beg and Oricach Narir, and one of the component tracts of the Shanachas Mór was also devoted to the issue of status, but that survives only in extracts. These texts vary considerably in the amount of detail they provide for any particular category of person. Thus, for example, the first one on the list there, Creath Gavlach, goes into great detail for each grade of the lay freemen, whether commoners, nobles, or kings, which it names. But on the other hand, it does not go beyond this group. It does not deal with churchmen, with poets, with craftsmen, but it goes into great detail. In contrast, Oricach Beg, on the handout there, has a much wider range. It covers lay freemen, ordained clerics, Latin scholars, poets, judges, craftsmen, and entertainers, but is much thinner in details. One essential piece of information, however, which all status texts must provide is a figure for a person's loch nenach or honour prize, item 4 on the handout. This loch nenach or honour prize is a measure of a person's status. And while the criteria for attaining status will naturally differ for different classes of person, for example, a peasant or a poet, right? A peasant will be on the basis of their wealth, a poet on the basis of their ability. Once an honour prize has been assigned to them, they can be measured against each other for practical legal purposes. While texts which provide little more than lists of honour prizes may not seem the most promising of sources, they can in fact be quite revealing of the relative standing of various groups in society. Thus, for example, the statement in Oricach Beg that a highly skilled wright can attain to an honour prize of 15 shades does not mean very much on its own. Right? What is 15 shades? Right? We don't have to worry about the absolute value of 15 shades. What we have to worry about is when we take into account that this is also the honour prize assigned to the Ada Taoisha, who is the fifth from the top of the noble and royal grades, we get an idea of the very high regard in which skilled craftsmen were held in this society. As we will see presently, honour prizes also have something to tell us about the position of ecclesiastics. Now, even the Collectio Canonum Hebronensis has some of the characteristics of a status text in that its first 9 books are concerned with the 7 canonical grades of the Church along with their 3 subgrades. Handout 5. So it lists the 7 grades there. It gives them in a descending order, is on the list there. Episcopus. You're familiar with these terms: bishop, priest, deacon, subdeacon, lector, exorcist, and ostiarius, usher. But they also have then 3 subgrades: the acolyte, the psalmist, and the cleric. These grades then, handout 6, appear in a number of vernacular law texts. For example, the 8th century law text Breatnach has the 7 grades, and they're given there in the Irish versions. Epscob, Sagart, Dechen, and Sovdechen, of course, are all borrowings from the Latin, as is Lichtro, Lector. Glantith is a loan translation, as is Dorseth, right, rendering Ostiarius. And then that also lists the 3 subgrades, as in the Latin text, the achlith, the salmicadlith, and the cléadach, the goran, the tonchuk cleric. On the other hand, then handout 7, Odikech Beg lists only the 7 grades, the 7 clerical grades. It ignores the subgrades. And also it puts the lector in the 7th rather than the 5th place. Now, an important point regarding these grades is that they are not simply an ordering according to relative importance. Rather, they are a set of stages through which an individual goes, a kind of a career path, if you want to think of it in those terms, so that a person in any particular grade has already passed through all of the grades below that. In other words, a bishop will previously have been a priest, a deacon, before that a subdeacon, and so on. This is brought out and indeed given scriptural sanction in the medieval idea, which did not begin in Ireland, of the ordinals of Christ, but they are attested in Ireland from a very early period. In this formulation, Christ is said to have fulfilled the function of each of the 7 principal grades as follows, and I cite from the Collectio Canonum Hibernensis in section 8 on the handout. He was an usher when he opened the doors of hell, an exorcist when he cast out 7 demons from Mary Magdalene, a lector when he opened the book of Isaiah, a subdeacon when he made wine of water in Cana of Galilee, a deacon when he washed the feet of the disciples, a priest when he took bread and broke and blessed. He was a bishop when he raised up his hands to heaven and blessed the apostles. So, and I've given a reference there on the handout as well to Roger Reynolds' work on the ordinals of Christ, he has a section there on the ordinals of Christ in medieval Ireland. Now, the status text, Creath Govlach, is almost exclusively concerned with the laity, commoners, nobles and kings, but interestingly, in the open section, it addresses the question of why the various classes of persons should be divided into grades at all, and at the same time offers a reason why the church and its institutions ought to take an interest in differences of status. This is item 9 on the handout, and I read from the translation that on what basis have the lay grades been divided? On the basis of correspondence with the grades of the church. For any grade which there is in the church, it is right that there be a corresponding one amongst the laity, for the sake of proving by oath, or denial on oath, or of evidence, or of judgment from one to the other. This is, in other words, these are an exemplary list of for all practical legal purposes. Now, naturally, one would expect the status text to cover the canonical grades, the clerical grades, and as we have seen, the principal variation is whether or not the 3 subgrades are included. The particularly interesting development in early medieval Ireland, however, was the extension of the 7-grade structure to 2 other important groups in the church, the Latin and scriptural scholars on the one hand, and the officers of the church, including the administrators of the temporalities of the church, on the other. The texts which covered these grades afford us some interesting glimpses of the institutions of the church. So handout 10 then is on the officers or administrators of the church. These are termed on the handout there, Gráda, Ord, Egelsa, literally the grades of office of the church. And simple lists of the 7 officers, which are the Archanach, the superior, the prior, the cook, the steward, the gardener, the doorkeeper and the miller are found. They are given references in vernacular texts and also in Middle Irish, CIH 687, item 11 on the handout. In this Middle Irish commentary at 687, interestingly, the honour price of each grade is set at half of the grade below, above it. So the Archanach has the item 11 on the handout. Half the honour price of the superior for his prior. Right? So the superior is the highest grade. The next below that is the sheknab. That is 10 cows and 1 3-year-old dry heifer. This is, of course, half of 21 cows, which is equivalent to 7 covels, which is the same honour price as that of the bishop, the king, and so on. But this halves all the way down from grade to grade. Each one gets half of the preceding one. So, of course, this, in other words, the honour price of this group decreases at a very fast rate. Repeated halving results in an honour price of less than 1 shade, right, for the lowest grade. So you're talking about a great variation. The highest grade, if you use the term, the unit of value shade, the highest will have 42 shades, the lowest will have less than one. Right? 21, 30 second, 32 over 32 to be precise. Right? Less than one shade for the lowest grade, the miller. Right? So that's from Middle Irish commentary. That the same principle applied in the Old Irish period can be inferred from a gloss in the Old Irish glossing of the Seanchas Mór, although it names only 3 grades, the third of which has a different title. This is item 12 on the handout. The status of this grade, half of it is assigned to the next lowest, i.e. half the status of a superior for a prior, half the status of a prior for a sub-prior, but importantly then, similarly throughout all the other grades. Right? And interestingly there you have the use of Latin similiter per omnes gradus used in commentary on an Old Irish text. Then item 13, this halving, the principle of halving for officers is further confirmed, but only for the Shechnab, the prior, by a statement in Orikech Beg, right, which has item 13 in the handout. So half the status of any individual for his wife, or for his dutiful son, or for his steward, or for his prior. So the individuals in question, of course, are husband, father, king, and ecclesiastical superior, respectively. Now, naturally, we would expect the full range of these officers to be found only in the larger ecclesiastical establishments, such as, for example, Armagh, Clonmacnoise, Kildare, Emily, etc. Furthermore, these offices in all likelihood included an element of administration. Thus, for example, the duties of the cog, the cook, will include more than the basic function of cooking food. And indeed, in the larger establishments, the cog may well have had no part in the actual cooking, but rather have supervised others doing it. Right? Certainly, an administrative role for the cog, even in a lesser establishment, is envisaged by this nice little passage here from the Imre of Corrie Vailadún, Old Irish tale. So this describes, the various islands that they visit. Anyway, this island, they again to read from the translation. When they had drawn near it by rowing, they saw that it was a human being. He was clothed only with the white hair of his body. He engaged himself in prostrations on a broad rock. When they had come to him, they entreat a blessing from him and asked him whence he had come. So second part of the translation, from Tory verily, he said, I have come, and in Tory I was reared. Then it came to pass that I was a cook therein, and I was an evil cook. For I used to sell the food of the church wherein I was dwelling, for treasures and jewels for myself, so that my house became full of counterpanes and pillows, and of raiment, both linen and wool, of every colour, and of brazen pails, and of small brazen vessels, and of brooches of silver with pins of gold, insomuch that unto my house there was nothing wanting of all that is hoarded by man, both golden books and book satchels adorned with brass and gold. And I used to dig under the houses of the church and carry many treasures out of them. Great then was my pride and my haughtiness. Now, this, of course, is of interest in that it shows that the cog could have an administrative role, one thing, as the person in charge of the food supply. Right? And, of course, then he sells it rather than administers it. On the other hand, there would not seem to have been much potential for the corrupt practices outlined in it in the minor and isolated establishment of Tory Island, so that it may well be that the author has simply projected what he was familiar with in larger establishments onto a lesser one. And one other point, I suppose, about these offices of the church is that nowhere do you get is this presented as a career structure. While the administrative, there may be a certain amount of administration, that the prior, the second grade, the shecna of the prior, could be then be eligible for promotion to the archionach superior. But I don't think, taken as a whole, you're looking at a person, first of all, becoming a miller, then becoming a doorkeeper, then becoming a gardener, then becoming a steward, then becoming a cook as part of a career structure. Now, another point is that the standing of the superior of the major establishments is shown to be remarkably high. Handout 15. Thus, the 9th century status text, Orecach Beg states, again, translation, supreme over other kings is the King of Munster. His honour price is 14 cobbles. A supreme noble bishop has the same. The superior of a great city has the same, as, for example, Emily or Cork. Placing the superiors of Cork and Emily on a par with the provincial king can only mean that the institutions they controlled must have been enormously rich and powerful. Now, an important function of the offices of these officers was to administer the temporalities or material wealth of a church. Under the temporalities of the church must be included the services of church vassals who provided regular food rents and other services, including labour to a church. These vassals correspond to the class of person called Céile or client in early Irish society. I've given some of the terminology relevant to clientship there in item 16. And basically, clientship is a relationship between client and lord, a grant in base clientship. The forepurchase is given by the lord to the client, and then on the basis of that, a regular render known as base tigia or simply base customary render is given by the client to the lord. It's a regular and defined render rather than a series of arbitrary exactions by the lord. It is, however, more than a commercial transaction, as it also establishes an ongoing relationship in which other services are owed by the client to the lord. Now, while the Old Irish status tracts distinguish various grades of commoner, the most important criterion being wealth, we may safely assume that most, if not all, commoners were in a relationship of clientship to either a secular lord or to a church. In other words, an individual church functioned as an institutional lord. The parallels between secular and ecclesiastical clientship are brought out in a number of ways in the law text, handout 17. So, for example, the typical commoner of the laws belongs to the grade of boada, that's there in handout 17, and not infrequently it is specified that it can be either secular or ecclesiastical, as in the first citation there. A layman or cleric lower in rank than a superior boada does not give testimony in this law. That is a lay or a cleric boada. Clerical boada, or the next one, Ní agad acht ó bóadach of Athach agus Bachlach. He only pleads on behalf of secular and ecclesiastical boadas. Similarly, the plain reference to a boada like, again, in that the handout there, 17, a boada like a lay boada clearly implies a corresponding ecclesiastical one. A sentence in one of the component tracts, handout 18 of the Seanachas Mór, draws a more comprehensive parallel between the two, that is, lay and ecclesiastical clientship, lordship, and also shows us that it is the Archeanach, the highest of the officers of the church, who should represent in person the institutional lordship of a church. Kith Aranebana Kovathius, this is in the text on neighbourhood relations. Why I've forward slash in my translation. Joint farming stroke neighbourhood for Kovathius. Why is this so called? A number of reasons are given anyway. The one that concerns us here is alternatively, it is joint farming stroke neighbourhood because in like manner does a lord engage in it with a churl, so that's the lay side, as a church superior engages in it with a church vassal, the ecclesiastical side. Here again, the role played by this officer in all likelihood depended on the size of the institution. And the larger the institution was, the more likely it would be that the Archeanach might have delegated responsibility for the church's vassals to a lower ranking officer. That's speculation. Handout 19 then. Furthermore, the general term used for manchene, used for the services owned, so the sum total of the services owed by lay clients to a lay lord is manchene, and that is the term used in the text on lay clientship in the Seanachas Mór and elsewhere. A word which is in origin an abstract to monach on your handout there, which itself is a borrowing from Latin monachos, which of course originally would have meant monk. But it has a wider meaning than monk in Old Irish. It can be used of all those under the authority of an abbot, and thus is the word normally used for church vassals. The word manchene then would originally have applied to the services rendered by church vassals, and its extension to the services due from lay clients is a further indication of the close similarities between the lordship exercised by a church and that exercised by a secular lord. And in addition to the services of clients, church will of course have been in regular receipt of regular donations, whether of movable or immovable property. I just give one example of each there in the handout number 20, and many more examples can be found in the Quiggin lecture, my Quiggin lecture there in the handout number 1, and the article by Donegal Corán in the Spoleto volume for 2010 on the Church and Secular Society. Now, in addition to using the material goods of the church to support clerics, the temporalities will also have been used to support learning and education. And this brings us to the third kind of ecclesiastic that appears in the law text, namely the learned man, the scholar versed in Scripture and in Latin, the language of Scripture. So handout 21. From the handout, the introduction to Shanachas Mór, where the secular leader is paralleled with the ecclesiastical leader, that's king and bishop, and the secular scholar with the ecclesiastical scholar, it is clear that the ecclesiastical scholar could be of the highest rank. It is in Shanachas Mór that the same compensation has been determined for a king and a bishop, and a pillar of the law of Scripture, that is the Latin scholar, and a master poet. So again, the nice parallelism between lay and ecclesiastical. The Old Irish handout 22, the Old Irish text, LÉACHT, also draws a parallel between secular and ecclesiastical scholars, but with a significant corollary. Again from the translation, so that the grades of Latin learning and of canonical orders correspond to each other in the same way as the grades of poets and free laymen, save that Latin learning is the mother of each of the learned professions, so that they all drink from out of her palm. In the case of the Latin scholars, as opposed to the other groups, there's quite a bit of variation in the titles assigned to the grades in the Old Irish law text. Some of these, such as Sruth Al, stream from a cliff, are quite striking, and they doubtless reflect different usage in different institutions, and might be compared with the variation found in contemporary universities and colleges. In the case of the set of titles cited in item 27 of the handout, which we'll come to in a while, we can at least say that they emanate from somewhere in the province of Munster, because as you will have seen from the citation from the Cork Emily, so on, there's firm evidence, supreme over kings is the king of Munster, firm evidence that this was the provenance of Urquhart Beg. Now, handout 23. LÉACHT divides them into the 7 grades. I've given there the rough translations of the titles. And this tract also interestingly gives some account of the learning and functions. It gives more than simply their honour prizes, the learning and functions of these grades. I'll just give some of them, handout 24, by way of example. For example, the first one, the grade, it says, regarding the highest grade, it says, a great sage then, he does not apologise for ignorance of anything in the 4 divisions of learnedness. Of the next grade, it says, amongst other things, that he's in the heart and the middle of his disciples who are learning from him. So this would seem to be one teacher and a plurality of pupils. The Onruth, whose title is not unique to Latin scholars, is said to be named for 4 reasons. So for the splendour of his teaching, for the numerousness of his interpretations, for the eloquence of his speech, for the extent of his knowledge. Indeed, he, this great Onruth, the title is found in each division of learning, whether poetry or Latin learning or historical learning, the only thing being that he has not reached the summit. The Onruth appears in the text on the fillet as the second from the top. Now, of particular interest is the explanation of the somewhat exotic title of the 4th grade, the Sruth Al, the stream from a cliff. I have that again on the handout there. 24, a stream from a cliff. This is what characterises it. This is the literal stream coming down from the cliff. It overwhelms every weak, light, insignificant thing. It carries off rocks. It alters the appearance of a strand along with, should be there only once, intense weather. So it, together with intense weather, storms and so on, changes the appearance of the strand. Right? So he's envisioning water pouring down from a cliff onto a strand and changing it, and the shape of it. So also the man who is likened to it. He overwhelms bad scholars, he overpowers them with the foundations of texts and interpretations, and his teaching is capable of altering the appearance of exposition with indulgence towards the unrightful people of little learning who ebb in the presence of a splendid stream. So he is not too much odium scholasticum devoted towards this is the indulgence towards the people of little learning. Now, the importance of this is, of course, is that in the view of some, at least, it shows that these scholars were not concerned solely with what was already known. They were expected to change things, to make new and original contributions to learning. Number 25 in the handout then, the lowest grade, the Felvach, is defined as Mac Ir Legen, as a Halma, a boy who has completed the study of his Psalms. In other words, he's by no means a beginner, having already completed the basics required of the scriptural scholar. And if we go by the famous poem, the Clientship, Covet the Ceol, as pointed out, of course, the Clientship is the Psalter. There he first slept with his Clientship when he's 7 years of age. So that's when, well, going by that anyway, he would begin the study of the Psalter at 7. One of the statements made about the 6th grade, the Freshnete interrogator, is that they discovered the Ade Igel Olaban, which I would tentatively translate anyway, as he inquires of his teacher in the cell of his master. And I think this means, this is moving on to a one-to-one, rather than we had the earlier one of the almost being in the middle of his pupils, but this is envisaging a one-to-one tutorial system. Or if you go to the other university, in the English sense anyway, supervision, isn't it? Yes. But anyway, one-to-one. Handout 27 then, the 9th century text Orikach Beg, on the other hand, is concerned solely with the question of status. Right? It doesn't say anything about these people, just their status. And distinguishes the 4 grades of soil literate, sage of scripture, the vice sage of scripture, a young sage, and a man of one of the 4 divisions of learning. And the rest of them then are collectively referred to as Mac Lagan, children of Latin learning, students in general. Which that is, again, it corresponds in a way, I suppose, with the although the titles are different. In the Meathlecht, the last 3, the Forsentith, the Freshneded, and the Felvach, are all at the level of learning. They're still at the level of learning, no matter how, even if it's still at one-to-one. Whereas the ones above that are portrayed as at the level of teachers. Right? So in that sense, even though the terminology does not correspond, the substance of it does. Okay, now in the Middle Irish commentary on these grades in the Orikach Beg, they are brought into connection with yet another set of 7 titles. This is item 28 on the handout, which gives the translation there. One for the person of 50s, that Caigdach, of course, the 50s here are the 3 50s of Psalm. Again, so it's the person who knows the Psalms. This is the, so again, you have even though different terms are used, right, the sense is a psalmist, one who's learned the Psalms. Then the second, so 1 couple for the person of 50s, 2 couples for the learner, 3 couples for the disciple, 4 couples for the historian, 5 for the teacher, 6 for the sage, and 7 for the Verlegen or the Drumkli, the 2 terms that the text uses for the highest grade. Okay. Now, the information gleaned from these sources can be supplemented from an account which derives from an unidentified Old Irish text. This is one of these extracts that I was talking about earlier, handout 29. This survives in the form of a list of the last 7 titles, the 7 titles as in handout 28. And this is from an Old Irish text, linguistically Old Irish, so that at least attests that set of titles also goes back to the Old Irish period. So printed in the Corpus Juris Hibernica, page 2101, and there are 2 citations from it in our Davern's glossary cross-reference. There they are each assigned the same honour price as in the commentary on Article Beg. That is, the lowest grade has one cobble, and then it increases by a cobble up to the top. It's not exactly clear whether this belongs with the extracts from the Old Irish text or with later glosses, however. There's also a later rewriting of this passage with more extensive glosses in Dovaltach Mac Firvishic's legal glossary in TCD manuscript. I've given the details there on the handout, 29. And this passage is it's all assembled under the headword Coigdach, the person of the 50 Psalms, and it's printed by O'Curry. The glossary itself is unpublished, but this particular passage is printed in O'Curry's Lectures on the Manuscript Materials, 494-5. And again, we'll just look at some of the passage in this. The most informative statements in the Old Irish text are the two concerning that is, the extracts of the Old Irish text concerning the lowest and the highest grades, respectively. So the lowest grade there is item 30 in the handout. Coigdach, a person of 50s. Canas salma salavra. Shecht vichit forad adech ir lothar agus eber. So a person of 50s who chants psalms eloquently, 70 which is of course 150, in accordance with proper disposition and enunciation. So in other words, although the titles differ from these three lists, they all say that this is a person who has learnt the psalms, right? Even though different terminology is used, it's the same thing. Right. But particularly interesting, handout 31 there is the statement concerning the Drumcli, who is the highest. It's important evidence for the range of intellectual interests of the Egna, the Latin scholar, or the ecclesiastical scholar, and justifies rendering this term as ecclesiastical scholar in the sense of both scriptural scholar and Latin scholar. And this is to be read as I have it on the handout there, with some the addition of macrons. Drumcli dechan o zechbreither kolman. So a Drumcli pronounces on everything from the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, to the Etymologiae. Thus, he is required to cover both scriptural scholarship from the Ten Commandments on and Latin learning in general, up to and including the Etymologiae. And this, of course, list is exemplary rather than this thing. It doesn't mean just only these two things, but the Etymologiae or Origines of Isidore of Seville, the major encyclopedic work of the early Middle Ages, which circulated in Ireland for not very long after its composition and gained great authority there. This is reflected in the very name used for it. Culmen is a borrowing of Latin culmen, top, summit, and means culmination of knowledge. In this connection, we may note that the title of the highest grade of ecclesiastical scholar used in this text is a comparable meaning. Is a compound of drum. This is the Drumcli. Drum is back or ridge, and cli is post, and could be rendered something along the lines of summit or pinnacle. Now, the glosses in Macfirvishic's legal glossary supply further information, and if, as is probable, they are taken from a Middle Irish source, they can at least be taken to apply to the latter part of the pre-Norman period. And thus, for example, regarding the third grade from the top, it has the following. A teacher, that is, a man who has knowledge of grammar, and the croissant underlined there means that is an indication by O'Curry that the thing is doubtful in the manuscript. And syllabification and mathematical calculations and the courses of the year and the courses of the sun and the moon. Thus, on the one hand, he is not only literate, but is expected to be competent in grammar and metrics, and on the other, he is not only numerate, but he must also be competent in matters relating to the calendar and the computers, in order, especially, of course, to calculate the date of the movable feast of Easter. The Old Irish law texts then reflect an organised and complex institutional church, with the status text distinguishing three classes of ecclesiastic. Furthermore, there is no hesitation shown in advancing the standing of the church grades as much as possible. A comparison of the honour prices allotted to them with those of laymen show that the bishop and the highest ranking ecclesiastical scholar and the highest officer of the church were placed on an apex at the apex of the petty kingdom on a par with the king and the highest ranking poet. But this is not all. As we have seen already, that's on handout 29, the honour price of ecclesiastical scholars differed by one cobble for each successive grade in the, although it's not certain, each successive grade anyway. Handout 33, it is certain that this principle applied in the earlier period to clerics and orders. as is clear from the Old Irish text, Breatnach, as I have it there. Item 33 in the handout, where the principle is expressed rhetorically as covel, coch, groid, gavther, irdnengus, archon. A covel for every grade which is assumed in accordance with definite innocence. In other words, that you are a proper ecclesiast, you have a right to you move up to this grade properly and canonically. So every grade that you move up in the ladder, you add a covel to your honour prize, is what it is saying. And this immediately follows the account of the 7 grades cited in item 6 on the handout. And this is a significant feature which, as far as I know, has received a little attention so far. The practical consequence of this device for assigning honour prize was that one could cluster the churchmen who are towards the top of the scale, in fact almost all of them, at a much higher status than corresponding noble laymen. Thus, handout 34, using the standard equivalence of 1 covel equals 6 shades. You don't have to worry about the absolute value of 6 shades. 2 shades equals a cow. Does that make any difference? No, it's not the absolute values that matter here, but anyway, the standard equivalence of 1 covel equals 6 shades. The priest would have had 36 shades as his honour prize. The bishop, of course, had 42. The deacon had 30 shades, the subdeacon had 24 shades, the lector 18, the exorcist 12, and the usher 6. Now, the standard commoner of the law tracts had an honour price of 5 shades. What this in effect means is that every one of the first 6 grades were put on a par with nobles, and the very lowest grade was slightly, even he, although with the commoners, was slightly higher than the ordinary commoner. And you contrast these with the 6 grades of noble below the king, as described in the status text Creath Govlach, where the Tánaiste, the designated successor of the king, has 30 shades. The Ara Fergal has 25, the Ara Táiste 20, the Ara Ard 15, and so on. The Boeda then 5 shades, the typical commoner. This principle of decreasing by 5 shades for each grade is also attested in the status tract, which formed part of the Seanchas Maw. And while it may be countered that this rate of decrease, 5 shades per grade, is less than a rate of decrease of 1 covel, which is 6 shades, nevertheless, the point at which it starts, that is, the 30 shades of the Tánaiste, is lower than the 36 shades of the priest and the Soi Canonian. Right. So the rate of decrease, handout 36, from top to bottom, is even more steep in the case of the secular learned grades, the Philith or poets, where, as described in Orchach Nariar, a status text concerned solely with the poets, but in great detail. The honour prize of the grades below the olive are 20 shades for the Alnorth, so it's half of that for the olive. Half again, you get 10 shades for the Clee, 7 for the Clanna, 5 for the Dus, 4 for the Macroidivis, and 1.5 for the Fuchlog. So the Fuchlog, the lowest grade, is very much lower than the typical commoner of the law tracts. And it's a much greater range of status. Although the rate of decrease slows down, right, afterwards, for the first 2, the halving for the Alnorth and the halving for the Clee, it is particularly steep. And already by the 5th grade, as there is the 5th grade, we've reached the level of the commoner, 5 shades for the Dus. Okay, interestingly, the principle of halving for each successive grade was applied, as we've seen above, to even more thoroughly to the Grada Ord Egelsa, the officers of the church. And this served to sharply distinguish those office holders below the highest one, right, on the one hand, from the corresponding grades of clerics in orders. And the subtle privileging then of clerics was extended not to the ecclesiastical or the officers of the church, but it certainly was to the ecclesiastical scholars, as was clear, as we saw there from the item 28 on the handout. Now, the sources which have the other 2 sets of names also have 2 different schemes. Handout 37. In the 9th century Munster text, Oricach Beg, the honour prizes of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade of ecclesiastical scholar are set out as there. the honour prices of the ecclesiastical scholars only decreased by 5 shades for each grade. However, another notable feature of this text is the depressed status of the king of the petty kingdom. He has an honour price of only 3.5 cobbles, as opposed to 7 cobbles in the other texts. As well as the placing of the REACHTúIL, the provincial king, at the top of the hierarchy, in place of where the other texts have the petty king at the top of the hierarchy, and he has an honour price of 14 cobbles. Similarly, then, the supreme bishop and the superior of a major, the arcanach, have 14 cobbles, as noted in item 15 on the handout. This, of course, results in a much greater discrepancy between the honour prices of those immediately below the top as against those at the very top. And then handout 38, the scheme in LÉACHT is even more complicated. It assigns an honour price to the rochoi of 10 cobbles plus 10 ounces of silver plus 8 scruples, which is equivalent to 80 2/3 of a shade. The soil litra has the same honour price as the REACHTúIL, which makes equivalent to 84 shades. Now, there's something wrong there, right? If the person below the top has an honour price, there's something wrong in the transmission of the text. But you're still talking here about very, very high status and very high honour prices for these people. No honour prices are mentioned for the owners of the STATUTORY, whereas the lowest two then have honour prices of 1.5 cobbles, and the fresh person is 1.5, freshnate is 1 cobble, and the fellbuck is 0.5 cobble. Now, as I said, while there are doubtless problems with transmission here, nevertheless it is clear that we have to do with a source which assigned very high status to all of the grades of ecclesiastical scholars. The unresolved question in all of this is whether the variation between Orichat, Beg, and LÉACHT and the other texts is whether we have to do with regional variation or developments over time. Right. Now, the last thing there that I for the privileging of the ecclesiastics is under the heading of court procedure. I handout 39 to 42. A further means of giving an advantage to ecclesiastics, a legal advantage to ecclesiastics, was through the application of a principle attested both in the Old Irish period and in Middle Irish commentary, that the length of a statement one could make before a court depended on one's status. So handout 39. It appears, for example, in Breatnach in a passage concerning lawsuits brought by lords, poets, and commoners, where we read, I have a bit of ellipsis there, but anyway, the essential bits are their translation. The suit of a lord is the extent of 3 breathings. The suit of a poet is uttered in 2 breathings. The suit of a commoner is the extent of 1 breathing. Later on, in the same text, the number of breathings allotted to clerics is mentioned as follows: for shecht nanal of evel tair I egelsa. On 7 breathings, the lawsuit of the church will be prosecuted. So this is the length of the statement. Then the term used for the full statement is an anal. So you get the church gets more anal than anybody else, first of all, an ecclesiastic. And then 41, a further discrimination then in Breatnach is namely in the number of phrases allowed in a breathing. And it states, and so on. So let there be fixed in 5 phrases the attestation of commoners. A full 20 phrases is the suit of a powerful king. Elucidation extending, this is all the rhetorical style of the Breatnach. Elucidation extending to 3 breathings is his certain right. 2 breathings for a poet, 5 phrases for the man of the commoners, 10 for the man of a lithe. And then the full consequences of these criteria for distinguishing between lords, poets, commoners, and ecclesiastics are brought out in a more explicit form in a Middle Irish commentary on an extract from the passage in handout 41. So in commentary, in handout 42, some commentary on that. And it says 7 breathings for the ecclesiastic and 7 phrases in each breathing. Right? 3 breathings for the Lord and 7 phrases in each breathing. Right? 2 breathings for the poet and 5 phrases in each breathing. A single breathing for the commoners and 5 phrases in it. So again, a subtle privileging of the ecclesiastics, even in the way that they're allowed, never mind their status, which of course your very status affects your your legal capacity, but also in the length of the statements that they're allowed to make in a court case. Now, this privileging of status, then, or privileging of clerics, is thus woven in both explicit and subtle ways throughout the text of the laws. The ordained clerics and the Latin scholars are granted high status, and what is particularly important is not simply that the bishop and chief scriptural scholar are placed at the level of a king. What is even more striking is that the grades below these, with the exception of the 7th grade, are all placed on a par with nobles rather than commoners. Equally important in this regard is the fact that the officers or administrators stand apart from other ecclesiastics in that, except for the highest grade, they have a much lower status. Towards the beginning of my talk, I cited a passage from Creath Govlach concerning why the church might be interested in status. The more one examines the early Irish law text as a whole, the more one sees the extent to which the church had a very real and active interest in this issue. The question of status was worked on and indeed manipulated by the church in such a way as to place the 7 grades of clerical orders along with the Latin scholars at the centre and at the summit of privilege in early Irish society. Thank you very much.